Oceanographers thought the bottom of the Mariana Trench would be Earth's last quiet place. They were wrong. When they finally got a microphone down there, what they heard terrified them. Human noise had somehow reached the deepest spot on the planet. Plastic pollution was changing how sound traveled, and creatures were making calls no one had ever documented before. The 23-day recording revealed something shocking. Scientists now fear we've broken something that can never be fixed. The evidence is all in those recordings, waiting to be heard. In 1875, the crew of the HMS Challenger dropped a rope into the Pacific Ocean, expecting to find the bottom eventually. But the rope kept going and going until it hit something over 26,000 feet down. That moment shook the scientific world. They had just discovered a place so deep it made Mount Everest look small. At that depth, the pressure is more than 1,100 times what we feel at sea level. That's like having an African elephant stand on your thumb. No human could survive it. No normal submarine could survive it either. This was the first clue that Earth still held secrets. It wasn't ready to give up eyes. Far below the surface lies a spot known as Challenger Deep, which plunges around 36,070 feet into total darkness. It's the deepest place we've found on the planet. Down there, the water is just above freezing, and the darkness is eternal. Sunlight never arrives, and yet life exists. Microscopic organisms survive in the chemical-rich mud. Even stranger are the Huddle snailfish creatures that somehow live nearly 27,000 feet down. Scientists believe that's about the limit. Below that, even these oddities can't handle the crushing pressure. Deep-sea researcher Mackenzie Geringer said they think that's the upper edge of how far fish can adapt. Beyond that line, it's all simpler life microbes and organisms that could easily be mistaken for something from another world. And it's not untouched by humans. In 2019, explorer Victor Visco dove into Challenger Deep in a submersible and made it to 35,853 feet. He expected to find silence, mystery, maybe new life. What he found was plastic, a candy wrapper, or a plastic bag. No one could say for sure, but it was there, resting at the deepest known point on Earth. That single piece of trash was a brutal message. Pollution had reached even here, in a place no sunlight touches. Tiny creatures down there have been found with microplastics in their bodies. As Geringer put it, human impact reaches these places before we even know what's down there. But the trench doesn't just sit still, it shifts. The Mariana Trench is a tectonic battleground. One plate pushes under another, making it a violent place beneath the surface. In July 2016, a magnitude 7.7 earthquake hit near the trench. If that happened on land, buildings would collapse. Underwater, it sent low rumbles echoing through the deep. Some of the strange noises heard before might have been caused by those tectonic tremors. The ground doesn't just rumble, it speaks in deep moans and muffled thunder. For years, oceanographers were confused by mysterious low-frequency sounds, until they realized some were likely the trench itself moving and cracking. Scientists used to think the trench was silent, a kind of underwater graveyard. Then in 2015, NOAA decided to test that idea. They dropped a microphone, an advanced hydrophone, down to the very bottom. What they heard wasn't silence. It was constant sound. At the deepest point of the ocean, noise never stops. Some of it was natural, some of it was human, and that terrified them. To build something that could survive down there took insane engineering. The hydrophone had to withstand over 16,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. That's like having an elephant balance on a postage stamp. The team used a titanium sphere and carefully placed ceramic sensors inside. But even with all that, dropping it too fast could crack it, so they lowered it at just 5 meters per second, which meant it took over 6 hours just to reach the bottom. One wrong move and it would be crushed like a can under a tank. It worked for 23 days from late July into August 2015. The microphone sat in Challenger Deep, recording everything. Over 500 gigabytes of audio were collected, more than 1,000 hours of sound. But retrieving it was another battle. There were typhoons, scheduling problems, and the constant risk of losing the equipment. It wasn't until November that a U.S. Coast Guard vessel from Guam, the cutter SEOA, finally went back to haul it up. For 3 months, the microphone had waited in total darkness, battered by pressure and storms that raged even deep below the surface. The mission cost over $500,000, but what they got back was priceless. Lead scientist Robert Juck said there was a strange feeling of nervous excitement as they opened the data. At first, the team expected silence, but when they played back the 23-day audio recording from the bottom of Challenger Deep, what they heard was anything but quiet. The very first thing that stunned them was the sound of a typhoon, not above the ocean, but from nearly 36,000 feet below. In late July 2015, a massive Category 4 storm passed over the region, its winds raging at over 150 miles per hour. And yet, from the ocean floor, the hydrophone recorded every moment of its fury. The sound didn't come through as sharp gusts or sharp bursts, but as a deep, growing roar that lasted for days. To the scientists listening, it felt like a monster waking up and growling. One described it as the trench itself, groaning under the weight of the storm above. In 2014, something strange echoed through the deep waters near Guam. a low rumble followed by a strange metallic twang like a frog croaking through a robot's voice. Box was picked up by underwater gliders. No one had heard anything like it before. It wasn't a whale call anyone recognized. It wasn't a submarine or sonar. It wasn't even an earthquake. And yet, the sound repeated over and over, season after season, deep in the western Pacific. Oceanographers stared at the spectrograms, totally baffled. It was eerie. One NOAA scientist said it sounded alien and kind of terrifying. Another joked it was like a burp in space, but underneath the humor was real confusion. No one could explain what was making that sound. By the end of 2015, researchers had picked it up many times. Always in the same general area, mostly between August and November. That narrow seasonal window was strange on its own, but it also hinted at a living source. Something biological that migrated or behaved differently depending on the time of year. The fact that the sound had 5 separate phases, each with a different rhythm and pitch, made it even weirder. Nothing in the ocean sang like that. The closest thing was a Star Wars-style soundboard of strange whale calls. And yet, this one didn't match any known species. It began with a low frequency around 38 Hz, then climbed up sharply, ending in a bizarre twang that peaked near 8 kHz. No machine would make something that oddly musical. By 2016, oceanographers had started calling it the Western Pacific buyout twang. Still no proof of where it came from, but a few started to suspect whales, specifically bowline whales. The sounds weren't mechanical. They were rhythmic and biological. They didn't come from deep inside the trench or the seafloor. They came from just beneath the surface. And interestingly, those same waters were known for brides, whales, shy, elusive creatures that rarely come close to ships. Their presence during the recording season seemed more than coincidence. But brides whales had never been known to make a call like this. It was almost too weird. Then came the breakthrough in 2018. NOAA. Scientists while aboard a research vessel were recording the twang calls in real time. At the same moment, they visually spotted brides whales nearby. This happened again and again. The whales weren't just passing through. They were calling out while the recordings happened. The patterns matched. Localization confirmed the sounds were coming from the same spot. The whales had been surfacing. No more guessing. The evidence was finally there. By 2015, most researchers were convinced the mystery noise haunting the Pacific for years wasn't aliens or submarines or deep sea monsters. It was a whale song. Specifically, a strange, complex regional version of a bride's whale call. Possibly a mating call, possibly a social contact signal. No one knew for sure. What they did know was that this sound had never been recorded before. Not in the Atlantic, not in the Indian Ocean. Only here, only this group. It was like a dialect. A song passed between a small group of whales in a corner of the Pacific we barely study. What made the buyout twang so mysterious for so long wasn't just the sound itself, but the fact that it went unnoticed for years. Bride's whales are notoriously hard to study. They don't jump out of the water like humpbacks. They don't migrate in large, predictable groups. They're tropical, private, and very rarely seen. It took nearly a decade to connect their presence to the strange call, and even after it was identified, the sound still didn't feel entirely natural. Even some scientists admitted how unsettling the sound felt at first. It didn't match the rhythm of anything familiar, and that's what made it so powerful. It showed how much we still don't know about the ocean. If a sound this weird, this loud, this repetitive could remain a mystery for years, what else is down there that we haven't heard yet? Before anyone figured out what the buyout twang really was, the world had already gone wild with theories. The internet lit up with speculation, and even a few scientists quietly played along. One of the first things people jumped to was the idea of secret military experiments. The sound felt too mechanical, too sharp, too strange. Forums exploded with claims that the US Navy was testing some kind of ultra-low frequency communication system, or maybe even running secret underwater bases in the Pacific. People pointed to the metallic nature of the twang as evidence that no animal could have made it. The theory picked up so much steam that NOAA actually had to release a statement saying there were no naval operations linked to the sound. That didn't stop anyone. Conspiracy forums kept buzzing. Some claimed there were UFOs under the ocean. Others swore there were alien submarines watching us from the deepest parts of the trench. It was a story made for late-night rabbit holes. And it wasn't just machines or aliens people imagined. A whole other crowd believed the twang was a message from something massive and alive. The conversation quickly tied itself to the old 1997 bloop. That eerie underwater sound, which some people once thought came from a sea monster bigger than anything we've discovered. Turned out the bloop was just ice shifting underwater. But no one really cared about the truth once the mystery had taken hold. So when the buyout twang appeared, everyone jumped on it. Maybe this was our second shot. Maybe the ocean was finally revealing a giant creature. Cryptozoologists argued that the sound was just too strong. Normal whales couldn't do that. They claimed this might be proof of an unknown species, something bigger than a blue whale, something ancient. The strange metallic echo in their eyes could come from a huge internal chamber inside the beast. like a massive sinus cavity humming through the water. It sounded like science fiction, but people loved it. Newspapers and websites ran with it. Headlines asked if a new sea monster had been caught on tape. It was all so dramatic, it kept the public hooked, even when researchers eventually linked the sound to a type of whale. Some people didn't want to let go. What if the whale was just one part of it? What if something else was still hiding down there? More theories followed. Some people said maybe it wasn't a whale at all, but something totally unexpected, like a giant squid. For years, scientists believed squid were completely silent, but some speculated maybe that wasn't true. Maybe there was a deep-sea species out there making long, echoing calls we'd never heard before. Others took it even further and pointed to the high-pitched component in the sound around 8 kilohertz. They said this could come from some bioluminescent creature using a form of sound-based signaling we don't understand yet. The way the biotwang shimmered and rang out made people think of alien technology, or at least alien biology. A few even claimed it was a message, an actual alien signal coming from an extraterrestrial base hidden beneath the waves. Some said it sounded exactly like the hum of a submerged spacecraft. It echoed the 1989 movie The Abyss and made it feel like science fiction was bleeding into reality. One cryptozoologist went as far as to say, "The ending of the biotwang defies biological explanation." He called it the kind of sound that proves the ocean still hides things more unbelievable than fiction. That one quote was shared endlessly. People already fascinated by the deep sea were now hooked all over again. There was another set of theories that weren't about aliens or monsters, but about something a little closer to home and much darker. Environmentalists began to wonder if the sound could be coming from normal animals who had been damaged by us. What if whales were changing their calls because of all the pollution we've dumped into the sea? Some imagined that radiation, heavy metals, or plastic waste had warped their biology, creating mutant vocal cords. The idea of Frankenstein whales, damaged creatures whose voices now echoed with strange mechanical tones, caught people's imagination, even if there wasn't any evidence. In a few advocacy articles, the biotwang was used as a warning. If we couldn't even explain what we were hearing down there, maybe we were responsible for it. Maybe we had already changed the ocean in ways we couldn't undo. Of course, the truth turned out to be more grounded. The sound likely came from a type of whale, maybe a bride's whale or something closely related. But that didn't stop the stories. Even after scientists gave their explanation, the internet held on to its favorite versions. Some still believe there's a cover-up. Others think both things might be true, that whales are involved. But so is something much bigger, hiding just beyond the edge of what we know. In 2024, after nearly 2 decades of mystery, the eerie underwater sound, known as the Western Pacific biotwang, was finally explained. And it wasn't done by a human at all. It took artificial intelligence to crack the code. For years, scientists at NOAA had collected recordings from deep in the Pacific, stacking up over 200,000 hours of underwater audio, enough to play continuously for 22 years. No person could ever listen to that much, not even in a lifetime. The sound, first detected in the Mariana Trench region, had baffled researchers since it was first reported in the early 2000s. It had the strange warble of a sci-fi laser, and echoed in the deep, with no clear source. People wondered if it was man-made, alien, or some deep-sea creature never discovered. But in 2024, something changed. NOAA joined forces with Google's AI for Social Good team and turned all that audio into data the machines could understand. They used a neural network, the kind of AI that learns by recognizing patterns in huge amounts of information. First, they transformed the sound clips into spectrograms, basically pictures of sound.